In this video, you'll see the construction of a massive, legendary palace built inside a steel factory or warehouse. All of this is done without any team, companies, or external support, and at a cost of only around $7,500. These two young men have a deep love for construction work and a strong passion for both old and modern tools. They are always keeping up with everything new in this field, and at some point they ask themselves, why not take advantage of all this experience and build our own palace by ourselves? And that's where the story began. Let's watch together the many challenges they faced in order to achieve this dream and how they managed to overcome them. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The first thing they did was choose the location where they would build their palace, which was a vacant site, and they defined the exact area it would occupy. From that point on, the real work began. The wood they would use to build the palace arrived, and they immediately started unloading it and cutting it to the measurements they needed. After that, they cut the wooden boards according to their specifications and assembled them in a cross-patterned layout with the main beams placed underneath and the boards stapled and fixed on top of them. This created a very solid structure that made the wood extremely strong. Once they finished fastening all the wooden pieces together into a single unit, a crane arrived and lifted it, since it was extremely heavy. With that, the very first wall of the palace's foundation was successfully formed.
But of course, it wasn't stable in its place yet, so they had to secure it firmly with screws. After that, they continued lifting the rest of the wooden structure, which would serve as the main support for this entire build. The vertical columns are what carry the weight of the house, while the horizontal braces are what give the structure stability and strength. They also act as a base for installing the walls later on. These columns are treated with special chemical materials to protect them from insects, mold, and moisture, and this treatment also increases the wood's effective lifespan. They kept reinforcing the frame so the palace would be solid and stable, capable of supporting the weight of the roof and all other loads without any tilting or cracking. Next, they assembled the roof frame, which is built in a triangular shape known as a gable. This design helps drain water and rain easily, adds extra interior space inside the palace, and gives the building a very beautiful exterior look. Not only that, it also provides greater strength and stability because the triangular shape prevents any movement or leaning of the wood. To lift these wooden sections up and secure them properly with screws, they used specialized equipment that saved them a huge amount of time and effort. After assembling the roof frame, they temporarily fixed it in place to make sure everything was aligned correctly. Once they confirmed that the gable was standing properly, they began installing the permanent fasteners to lock the structure firmly into its final position.
Now they moved on to a new stage, which was sheathing the roof with wooden panels. These panels are fixed into the core of the supports to provide a solid base for the roof itself and to protect the palace from rain and weather before installing the final roof covering. After that, they began creating the window frames in a preliminary form, placing them in the window openings according to the original design of the palace, and securing them firmly with screws. Once the window locations were defined, they started installing wooden panels on the walls. These panels act like the palace's outer skin, covering the wooden frame while adding another layer of rigidity and strength to the walls, and protecting the building from external conditions. After the panels were mounted onto the frames, they were fastened with screws and installed following a specific pattern to ensure the panels remained stable. They also sealed the gaps between the panels using a black adhesive. While installing the panels, they paid close attention to making sure that the joints did not line up on the same vertical line, so as to avoid creating weak points or cracks along a single seam. They didn't stop at the end of the roof either. They extended the sheathing all the way to the roof's edge so that they could later install a small metal piece designed to direct rainwater away from the body of the palace itself. After covering all the walls with wooden panels, they brought in metal sheets, cut them, and adjusted them precisely to their desired dimensions. These were installed along the edge of the roof and firmly secured using both adhesive and screws. This added extra stiffness to the roof, making it much more resistant to movement or loosening over time. After that, they covered the entire roof with these metal panels to give it strength and security. They began fixing the panels using adhesive tape made from a rubber-based material which acts as an effective barrier against both water and air. Screws were also used to secure the panels in place. Once the entire roof was finished, they focused on the area where the two sides of the roof meet at the peak of the triangle, known as the ridge. They sealed this section with adhesive and installed metal panels in the opposite direction of the rest of the sheets, fastening them very securely. Now that the palace was completely sealed from the outside and ready, it was time to move on to the interior, where a huge amount of work was waiting. Naturally, the first task was the flooring. For this, they brought in a large concrete mixer that could reach inside the palace to pour the concrete floor. At this stage, they needed additional workers to help them. As the mixer poured the concrete, they followed behind, spreading it evenly across the entire floor to make it smooth and perfectly level. This concrete floor forms the foundation of the entire interior structure. Because the palace has such a large area, the flooring process required a great deal of time and effort before it was finally completed. After the floor had fully cured, they used a special spraying device to apply a high-quality insulation material, sealing the surface effectively against dust and moisture.
This material also helps maintain the temperature inside the space. After that, they applied insulating adhesive tape along the walls, and on top of this tape, they installed a metal strip designed to support the stone cladding that would be applied later. They then began covering the walls one by one with the stone cladding you see here, securing each piece with screws until they reached a certain height on the wall. At that point, they installed a barrier and fastened it firmly with screws. Next, they opened an opening in the wall and installed metal flashing around it. This flashing acts as a small waterproof edge whose job is to prevent water from reaching the concrete or the walls. Inside this opening, they installed the first door using hinges and screws. After testing it and confirming it worked perfectly, they added an exterior frame, giving it a very bold and impressive look. They then continued installing the stone cladding all the way up to the door. Above the cladding on the remaining sections of the wall, they applied a reinforcing mesh, which helps prevent cracking and adds stability to the exterior layer. On top of that, they installed these panels vertically and secured them tightly with screws. They followed the same process on all the exterior walls of the palace. After installing the main panels, they moved on to the finishing work, such as edges and trims around the openings. Inside the palace, the insulating foam had dried, so it was time to continue the interior work. The first thing they did was build wooden frames, which they covered with white wax and used to seal off the openings. After that, they removed the excess foam and cleaned up the material that had fallen onto the floor. They then began working on the interior walls of the palace itself. The first step was building the wall frames. Before cutting a single piece of wood, they carefully reviewed their plans to make sure everything was precise and properly aligned. While doing this, they also took into account the locations of electrical lines, plumbing, air conditioning ducts, and the entire internal infrastructure so that no issues would arise later. Because in a project like this, any mistake could turn into a major problem down the line. After that, they started assembling the first interior wall of the palace. Pay close attention here because this next stage is one of the most impressive parts of the entire process. They laid the wooden pieces next to each other on the ground, and once everything was fastened together with screws, they lifted the wall into place and secured it to the floor from below. Next, they installed insulation material inside the wall, then continued building the rest of the walls using the same method. Large wooden panels were mounted onto the wooden framework, with the insulation layer continuing throughout. After that, they installed supports above the room's ceilings and secured them tightly with screws. At this stage, they were essentially creating the interior layout and divisions of the palace. For the large and heavy sections, they used small lifting tools to handle the weight. The work at this point was progressing very smoothly, with clear coordination and harmony between them. On top of the supports, they installed sheets of compressed wood, often referred to as chipboard or plywood, which are considered stronger and more reliable than standard wooden panels. They cut the panels side by side with extremely high precision and secured them firmly in place. In a wide area, they brought in a large wooden beam, and together they positioned it exactly where it needed to be, then added additional supports on top of it. This was done because the space you're seeing here was designed to be a large room. After that, they sheathed the rest of the area with compressed wooden panels, then moved up to the ceiling and began installing these panels between the wooden joists in the roof. They planned to build a second floor using the same method as the first one, dividing the entire space with wood according to the design. This layout includes very large open areas, making the interior of the palace feel extremely spacious. They then started cutting out the window openings, carefully choosing the best possible locations for them. The first step was applying an insulating sheet all around each opening. After that, they installed the prefabricated windows, which come with designated screw points to ensure they could be securely fastened. Once the windows were in place, they applied another layer of insulating sheet around them as well. For the windows on the second floor, they worked from inside the palace, while from the outside, they opened the window spaces, installed the windows, and sealed them using black insulating tape. They repeated this process for all the windows, both large and small. Finally, they decided to build a very large porch at the front of the house, which would give the exterior a simpler and more attractive look. To begin this step, they firmly anchored small metal pieces into the ground. They cut the wood that would be used for the porch and began assembling it in its designated location. This porch would act as a transitional area between the palace and the garden, wrapping all the way around the house. Its roof would be built with a gable design, just like the rest of the palace. After installing the wooden columns and removing all the excess material, they sheathed the structure with wooden panels, the same way they did for the rest of the palace. They continued working on the entire porch framework following this method until the whole palace was fully completed. For the porch roof, they installed wooden supports while leaving spaces between each one, unlike the main palace roof beams, which had very small gaps between them. This was done because the porch roof needed to be strong enough to carry weight while still maintaining an elegant and visually pleasing appearance. The porch columns were secured to the walls using specially designed structural connectors to achieve the best possible look and strength. After that, they went back to finish sheathing the roof, fastening the wooden panels onto the beams, completing the roof structure. Inside the porch, they added the final finishing touches by installing a metal ceiling, securing it tightly with screws. This covered all the exposed wood in the ceiling and had the added benefit of resisting weather conditions. Its smooth finish gave the porch a modern look and increased its overall durability. Finally, they installed flashing strips along the edges to prevent water from seeping into the walls, and with that, the porch was fully completed. The place already looks beautiful after finishing this stage. Just imagine how it will look once all the upcoming steps are completed. At this point, they went back inside the palace again. The first thing they worked on was the staircase that would connect the different floors. However, this staircase wasn't just a way to go up and down. It was carefully designed to blend perfectly with the open layout of the house. The first step was building the side supports of the staircase, which would hold all the steps. Once those were installed, they brought in wide wooden boards and began installing the steps one by one. After completing the steps, they installed the handrail. Once all the interior columns and supports were properly adjusted and secured, they began installing the final interior walls. The first step was covering the wooden frame and insulation with wide wooden panels, fastening them securely with screws. The panels were cut precisely to match the exact measurements needed.
At this stage, the palace really started to take shape. They then returned once again to finish the porch roof, covering it with metal panels just like the rest of the porch. After installing the roof, they paid close attention to the edges and final touches because these details are what truly elevate the overall look of the space and take it to another level. In an area where concrete had already been poured, they built a wooden structure made of columns and supports, and they also constructed its roof in a triangular shape. The gaps between the panels were sealed using black adhesive tape, completing this section with strength and protection.
There was also a door that hadn't been properly installed yet. They applied insulating tape around it, then installed its frame and covered the surrounding walls with stone cladding. In the area with the faucet, they prepared the tiles and shaped them so that the faucet would fit perfectly into the opening. They also installed window sills and were focused on completing all the remaining work inside the palace, which was still unfinished. There was a section of the palace exterior that hadn't been sheathed yet, so they worked on it here. After installing the reinforcing mesh, they fixed the wooden panels vertically. On top, they installed window headers and ceiling trims, securing everything tightly with screws. Now that this section was complete, they returned inside the palace, where the electrical system, plumbing, and roof structure had already been installed. They began covering the roof with white wooden panels and applied insulation material inside the roof. Metal strips were installed to support the second-floor ceiling panels, which were white metal sheets. These were fastened securely with screws, fully covering the second-floor area. They also completed the remaining staircases in the palace. They built the side supports and prepared the areas where the steps would be installed. Then they constructed the handrails for the corridor using a wooden frame with metal in the center. They continued this design along the entire length of the handrail and added wooden panels on top and beneath, fastening them securely to complete the staircase assembly.
This gave the handrail a very polished and solid look. They didn't leave it rough either. They carefully sanded the wooden panels to make them extremely smooth. After that, they brought in a small desk and placed it in the corner of a room, adding drawers next to it, fastening everything together with screws. They also mounted 2 cabinet doors on the wall and installed a large wardrobe next to one of the doors. In the kitchen, they focused on preparing the base for the sink, making sure it accommodated the plumbing and water inlets. Once it was properly adjusted, they installed the sink, then covered the rest of the kitchen base with ground plywood panels. They brought in a large marble countertop and installed it, while covering the ceiling entirely with metal sheets. On the floor, they installed brown floorboards that gave a professional finish throughout the palace. They also installed all the room doors and crafted additional pieces to use for interior windowsills as well as decorative trims for the doors. After a full year of continuous work and effort, the palace was finally complete. Every detail, from the wall panels, cornices, and doors, was perfectly coordinated. The result is a luxurious and elegant look. Inside, the space is extremely spacious and well organized, with multiple rooms, including a laundry room with a full bathroom, a dedicated art room, an office, a large bedroom with 2 bathrooms, a big living room that overlooks the kitchen, and a side bathroom. There are also high-quality windows and a storage room with plenty of shelving. And that's not even counting the second floor, which has a wide living area and multiple rooms that could be used for many other purposes. If you liked the idea of this house, which is designed in a warehouse-style structure, it's important to know that this is actually a very cost-effective concept because it's built almost entirely from wood. Now I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite part of this house, and what kinds of videos would you like to see next? That's it for today's video. See you next time.